We are on to our last lesson of memory, finishing off our booklet today. We are still looking at eyewitness testimony, but we're looking at how we can improve it through interviewing techniques and by something called the cognitive interview. So for this lesson, you will need, however you're making your lesson notes, whether that be on a computer or in your booklet or on paper, you will also need a separate little piece of paper for our starter, and there is also a little bit of additional information that there isn't quite room for in your booklet, so you'll need somewhere to write that on too. So let's get started. Our starter for today is what are the 3 types of interview and what are some strengths and weaknesses of each. Now this is back in research methods, 3 types of interview. Can you describe them and then give some strengths and weaknesses for me, please? Pause it, see what you can get. So as a little brief overview, 3 types. There is the structured, which is a set list of questions. You cannot deviate from that list. You can't change the order. You have to ask those exact questions to everyone in that exact order. Then you've got the semi-structured, where you will have a list of questions, but you've got a little bit of room for manoeuvre. You can personally add a different question in, ask for further elaboration. Then unstructured is more like conversation. Just how do you feel about this? You can then go deeper into that. So strengths of a structured interview is it's extremely reliable, and that's because every single person is getting consistently the same things. You will still get a lot of detail from a structured interview on a specific topic, but you might be missing further opinions, as it might restrict what an individual can say and discuss. So I might get asked, what is your favourite football team? And I say, rightly so, Liverpool. The next question might be, what's your favourite rugby team? I don't get to give the reason for it, what the story is behind it, anything like that. So that might restrict individuals, might make it a little bit less accurate. Semi-structured is still reliable. It is not as reliable as a structured, but it's definitely a lot more reliable than the unstructured. It also allows for a lot more elaboration. Doesn't mean that they can ask anything and everything around a topic, because they still want to keep this quite focused on a certain area of knowledge. So it still might restrict some answers, but it is a lot more valid than an unstructured. It gets you a lot more information. Whereas an unstructured, a positive of that is it's extremely rich in detail. You get the true opinions of an individual and true insight into their behaviour. However, it is very unreliable. You won't be consistently having the same interview with each individual participant, which makes it very subjective, and therefore it's difficult to analyse and compare between participants, as one participant might start off talking about football and end up talking about where they live, whereas another participant might start talking about football but end up talking about their childhood or their job. So there are a few issues with those. So that was just our quick little recap. What we do need to know is a little bit about standard interviewing techniques first. So a standard interviewing technique is a little bit more like you see on police programmes, good cop, bad cop, banging on the desk. They can interrupt you, so they might say, what happened on Tuesday? You start giving information, they stop you there, right, can you give me more detail on this? Stop you again, can you go back and do that again? Sometimes they can be intimidating, but that is more on the police programmes, like I said. And leading questions are sometimes used, which you already know about, and the issues that there are with this. So this is an improvement on that interviewing technique. Now the cognitive interview has a few different stages to it. So it can take longer in some aspects, but sometimes it doesn't. It's highly dependent upon the person, highly dependent upon the training that has been given to the individual that is the interviewer. So what is the cognitive interview? So because eyewitness testimony plays such a big role, we do need to make sure that they are very accurate. And like I've said, the cognitive interview is to try and improve that level of accuracy. So it's a method of interviewing eyewitnesses to help them retrieve more accurate memories and information. It is based on 4 main techniques that are thought to help recall and improve the accuracy of eyewitness testimony. So you need to make sure you know the names of these 4 stages or techniques and how they are done, what that means. So number 1, in-depth reporting. So the first stage is they are asked to tell the story in their own words and in as much detail. The person who is interviewing them cannot interrupt them. They should be encouraged to report everything that they can recall, even if it seems irrelevant. The interviewer's job at this stage is to encourage them rather than ask them any questions. So just trying to make sure they've got every detail, let them tell the story however they want to. So in-depth reporting or report everything is the name of this stage. Number 2, context reinstatement. Now this is to try and encourage the person to reinstate the context in the mind, so recalling environmental factors such as smells, it might be sounds, if it was inside it might be what room were you in, how they were feeling, what was your emotions like. Sometimes the interviewer might encourage them to close their eyes and ask them to envisage themselves in that room. So there are a few videos that I will point you to that show context reinstatement quite well. On police programmes as well, they do show this, especially Criminal Minds, they do this a lot, the context reinstatement bit in the interviews. So I will get a clip and I will send that to you. Number 3, narrative reordering. So this is where the participant or the person being interviewed is asked to start from a different point. So they might be asked to start at the end and work backwards. They might be asked to start in the middle, work forwards or backwards. And especially when reporting it backwards, it might provide them more cues if they think, right, what happened just before this? They might have missed that little bit of information. And it might also make them realise that some of it's inaccurate. If they can't tell it again in the same way, then it might mean that that bit of information that they've said isn't quite as accurate. But it might give us more information that they have forgotten to say, not meaning it, but they've forgotten to say it the first time they go through it. And number 4 is reporting from different perspectives. So the participant or the witness will be asked to tell the story again, but from someone else's perspective. So they might have said there was a woman across the road watching it. So the interviewer might say, right, imagine you are that person, what would they have seen? And that might allow them to again get some more finer details that they have missed out accidentally the first time. It also disrupts the scheme that you might have. So for example, if it was in a shop and you're usually there to get milk, you may have falsely reported that that is what you were going to get this time, that's where you were in the milk aisle or whatever. But if you get asked to report that from someone else's perspective, that might break that schema and you realise actually that isn't the place where you were, I was actually in this area instead. So that helps in making sure that schemas are broken, trying to make sure we get all the finer details that we can. So those are the 4 main stages. There is also an improved or an enhanced cognitive interview that was done a little bit later on. So enhancement of eyewitness testimony in the cognitive interview was done by Fisher et al. And that's the enhanced cognitive interview, they've put as ECI. So this includes a focus on the social dynamics between the interviewer and the interviewee, so making sure you maintain eye contact with them, you don't look away from them, things like that. And ways to reduce anxiety and distractions and speech rate by the use of open-ended questions. So it's all about making sure that the interviewer and the interviewee have got a relationship and a good rapport going, they feel relaxed, and that all distractions are reduced, anxiety is reduced, and using open-ended questions so you're not restricting. So that is the features of the enhanced cognitive interview. So that is most of the AO1 for cognitive interview, the 4 stages, and you need to know how to describe the 4 stages, you need to know the names of them. You'll need to also be able to apply them to a scenario. So the scenario might give Joe a scene as being a witness to a break-in of a car. He has been asked to report everything. What would he also be asked by the interviewer? And then you would link back to Joe as well. So make sure that you are comfortable with the stages, exactly what happens in each, and what you can apply to a scenario. Now this is the bit that there isn't room for in your booklet. If you're typing, just make a new text box. If you're writing into the booklet, put a post-it note over it, something like that would be easiest. So Geiselman did a comparison a little bit before the enhanced cognitive interview, comparing the standard interview to the cognitive interview. Now there is some issues with this. It was videos that the participants watched, and then they were interviewed by police officers, either using standard interview or the cognitive interview. And the results show that there is a significant increase in the amount of correct items recalled. So 35.58 for standard, 41.67 for the cognitive. Now it doesn't seem that big have a difference, but in such a high pressure environment where witnesses have so much influence upon convictions and so on and finding the right person, that is a good increase. We want eyewitness testimony to be as accurate as we can. Now, incorrect items, it doesn't change really. There is a very, very small decrease of the incorrect items, but it's more the correct items that this study focuses on. So write that down a little bit just as a bit of a comparison to is it effective, and this will be able to be used in your evaluation if you wish. So let's have a little look at our evaluation. So 2 weaknesses, 2 strengths. First weakness is the cognitive interview takes a lot of specialist training for a police officer to be allowed to use it, which makes it expensive. The training takes quite a long time as well. So why is this negative? Can you focus your PEC on the fact that it costs a lot of money to train somebody and takes a lot of time to train somebody? This might reduce the amount of people that are trained to conduct the cognitive interview because police forces can't afford to get a lot of people trained to do it. Try not to focus on the fact that it's a long process in the interview. Standard interview can take just as long, so that's not really much of a valid point. It's the training that is the main thing that you need to focus on, please. I'll cross that out on here. That's just a little bit of a, should say training, not the interview process. So I'll scribble that out. Think about the impact on the economy as well. If we're spending a lot of money training people, we won't actually be able to have more police officers, which will increase crime generally. It's a big circle and so on. So we've got a few issues. Even though it's good in increasing the accuracy, it's very expensive to get a police officer trained in it. So there's not too many, or not every police officer is trained in the exact same way. Next weakness. It was found that even though the cognitive interview increases accurate information, it also increases inaccurate information. So 81% increase in accurate, but also a 61% increase in inaccurate. Why is that a weakness? So you can mention that although it's a positive that there is such an increase, it also causes us problems in terms of the increase in inaccurate information, which may lead to the wrong conviction. So this would be your E. Your P would be that there is evidence that it increased inaccurate information. Your E is done. Think about your comment. What implications does that have on the legal system? So those are your 2 weaknesses. 2 strengths. There is a meta-analysis. So remember, a meta-analysis is just an analysis of a lot of different results from different studies. Has found that the enhanced cognitive interview has collected more correct information than the standard police interview. So why is that a strength for the legal system? Now you could replace this first one with the Geiselman study that we wrote down before, because that still shows that it's effective. Either is fine. If you are using this one, you could counter-argue and say, however, a meta-analysis does pose some issues as we don't know the full method of all of the studies used, but it's also quite reliable as we have found consistent results overall. So either will be fine. Your P is that it's effective, gains more accurate information. Your E, either the meta-analysis or the Geiselman one. Your C, why is that a positive thing? Why does it have practical implications? But counter-argue with the meta-analysis one maybe, or if you're using the Geiselman one, you could counter-argue with the lack of ecological validity as they watch videos. With this one, we don't know the methodology of all of the studies. Second strength, each individual component of the cognitive interview produces more information than the standard interview. So that not only increases the credibility of the technique amongst police officers, but it also means that the full cognitive interview doesn't necessarily have to be used. That might mean that that individual police officers don't have to be fully trained. They could just have knowledge of one component and still gain more information than a standard interview. So that's why that is a positive overall. Make sure you've got both of those down, 2 strengths, 2 weaknesses for this one. we are almost done. We are just going to do 2 exam questions just as a little bit of prep and revision ready for our assessment next lesson. So these are in the booklet. So Jenny was standing at a bus stop on her mobile phone. The weather was wet and cold. 2 men in the bus queue started arguing. One of the men was stabbed and badly injured. Later that day, the police questioned Jenny using a cognitive interview. They asked her to report everything that she could remember about the incident, even if it seemed unimportant. Apart from report everything, explain how the police could use cognitive interview to investigate what Jenny could remember. In your answer, you must refer to details from the passage above for 4 marks. Now, your big hint is you need to include information from that passage above. So information about Jenny, where she was standing and so on. So they've said they've done report everything. Give yourself 6 minutes. Try not to look back at your notes. See where you can get with your answer. So let's have a look at the mark scheme. Now, as you will see, it is all AO2 marks. So that is application to the scenario. So the answer should clearly relate to one or more. So you want one or more of the main techniques used in the cognitive interview other than report everything. So you could have said context reinstatement, recall from a changed perspective, or recall in reverse order or change in order. So you would have 1 mark for simple identification of a technique or a very brief suggestion. So tell me what you saw in reverse order would be 1 mark. 2 marks for naming 2 or more, or for very brief outlines. And then you need to get your additional elaboration. So it says a maximum of 2 marks can be awarded if there is no reference to details in the passage. So that means you could describe perfectly, that's a great line, Amy. You could describe perfectly what reverse the order is, describe what happened, but if you don't mention Jenny and how they could ask her to reverse that order, you only get a maximum of 2 marks, and that's an issue. So you need to make sure that you add a little bit more detail. So you could say, recall from a changed perspective is when Jenny would be asked to recall it from another witness's point of view, who was standing over the road from the stabbing. Give a bit more information on that. Then you could also include another one. Recall in reverse order. Jenny could be asked what happened once the man was stabbed. She could be asked to do it from that point and backwards to get all information from her. So I'd definitely do 2, if not the 3, but make sure you make reference very clearly to the passage. Next question then. Traditionally, police have questioned eyewitnesses using the standard interview procedure. This involves a period of free recall about an event followed by specific questions. However, an increasing number of police forces are now using the cognitive interview. Explain how a cognitive interview differs from a standard interview. Now, my hint here is they've given you some information about standard interviewing, so use it and then compare and make sure you use comparative language to get those marks. So 4 marks, 6 minutes again, give it a go. Let's have a look at the mark scheme, and again they are all AO2 marks, so application marks. So first it says differences could include the effectiveness of cognitive interviews and the implications such as cost and training required. So you could have gone for that it is more expensive to conduct the training in a cognitive interview, and would get marks for that, but you could have gone for the main techniques used. So you could have gone for the cognitive interview includes context reinstatement, report everything, recall from a changed perspective, reverse the order. Candidates who show some understanding of cognitive interview by naming are allowed a maximum of 2 marks, but you get further elaboration. For example, saying a standard interview might just ask witnesses to recall an event. However, the cognitive interview asks them to recall it in a different context. You need to give more detail, and I give 2 differences for the 4 marks. So one difference is the standard interview allows you to recall at any time. However, the cognitive interview goes further than this and asks you to report it from a different perspective, such as from another witness. Another difference is some specific questions are asked in the standard interview. However, You will allow free recall and report everything, and then you must reverse the order for the cognitive interview. Doesn't matter what your differences are, I'd just make sure there's 2 to cover your back. You probably wouldn't be able to get the 4 marks unless you did it in a lot more detail if you only did 1. So just make sure you do 2 to cover your back, especially if it's anything over 3 marks, always do 2, unless it tells you otherwise, obviously. So that's our memory booklet done. And I know this is a very strange way of working by just having these video lessons sent to you every so often, but hopefully it's better than it could have been. Just make sure you are revising. We will have time to recap and go over things. I'm not just going to leave you to do things, so to do memory on your own and not recap it before exams and stuff like that. You have got a mini assessment next lesson, so that is the last thing I need you to do for this week. Mini assessment, have a bit of a revise of memory, and then get that to me by Friday, please. But revise before it. I'm trusting you not to use your notes. Make sure you do it in the time and so on. It gives you a good reflection of how you are doing and anything else that you need to do, and helps me out providing your support as well. So just give that a go. Remember to ask me any questions. Email me with anything that you need help with. If you need more practice questions, anything like that, just let me know. But hopefully not too hard of an assessment, and I will speak to you soon.